Now I'm going to be discussing a common solid hazardous material, lead-based paint. As I travel internationally and educate many on how to simply deal with solid hazardous materials and safely contain them with green coatings encasement, I'm always amazed how differently countries look at similar situations with building products and how to handle them. Even though we have the internet with vast amounts of information rapidly available, it seems that it is either doesn't get accessed or paid attention to. It's stunning how one country can have such a strong and passionate stance on an issue, such as with solid hazardous materials, and another country can have a contrasting, if not completely opposite, take on the same issue and materials. Also interesting how two similar countries can deal with the same acknowledged challenges so differently. For example, take two scientifically advanced and progressive countries, such as the USA and what I'll call Country 2. Insert any one of dozens. Both work closely on many important issues. It is surprising how differently they deal with the same issue of lead in paints and the exposure to people as the paint ages and breaks down. Since 1978, the USA has outlawed lead in paint due to scientific evidence showing that as lead paint breaks down, it can be inhaled, ingested, and absorbed by humans, causing immediate and long-term damage. While Country 2 still manufactures and uses lead in paints, despite the scientific evidence showing its harmful effects on humans. Unlike exposure to other building hazardous materials such as asbestos that can take a long time to spread and show up, lead can be detected very quickly with a simple blood test. This swift test can result in showing elevated blood levels of lead in the bloodstream. So it is a mystery to me as to why a known toxic material would be continually used after decades of information being avoidable, stating that the substance is unsafe and should be removed from products. I may be able to understand if there is no other replacement for the offending materials, but that is not the case specifically with lead in paints. For decades now, there have been safe replacement ingredients for paints. Actually, superior ingredients that make products perform better and are preferred for the environment. In the USA, even though lead was removed from paint in 1978, millions of structures still contain leaded paint that continues to break down, get released into the environment, and expose countless to the dangers, many times to unsuspecting individuals that absorb the lead and suffer the consequences of that exposure. Humans have used lead since the dawn of civilization. Because of its availability, simplicity of extraction, and ease of use, it is a highly malleable and pliable metal that is easy to smelt. There is evidence of its use in the early Bronze Age, where it was used with arsenic and was mentioned in the book of Exodus. Ancient alchemists thought that lead was the oldest metal and associated with the planet Saturn. Lead's symbol is Pb, is an abbreviation of its Latin name, plumbum, the same Latin root of the English word plumbing. Lead is a chemical element on the periodic table symbolized as Pb with the atomic number 82. Lead is soft, malleable, heavy, and a toxic metal. The use of lead as a component of paints dates back to ancient Egypt, Greece, and Rome. In the USA, during the first half of the 1900s, lead-based paint was widely acknowledged as the best paint in production due to its durable and washable surface, from which germs could easily be removed. Prior to 1940, lead was in just about all paints, and many federal and state government agencies recommended and even specified its use. As the U.S. National Bureau of Standards, Interior Department, and Forest Service stated in the 1930s and 1940s, lead pigments were the most important of white pigments and were the very best choice for homeowners because it allowed for longer intervals between repaints. In fact, from the 1920s through the 1940s, the U.S. federal government was one of the foremost proponents of use of lead-based paint. Based on the recommendations of former government paint experts, President Franklin Roosevelt's Public Works Administration had specified the use of lead-based paint for the interior use of 50 or more public housing projects because of its durability it provided. Longer intervals of coating application and durability are both other topics we focus in on this course, as they are both important characteristics of a sustainable product. Despite mounting evidence of the effects of its use, lead was still used in paints in the United States until the dangers became too widely known to be ignored. After the 1978 ban, paint manufacturers replaced lead with other ingredients. When the regulations limiting the allowed amounts of lead in paints were implemented in 1978, the use of lead oxide had all but stopped. Many countries began banning lead in residential paints early in the 20th century, yet many industrialized countries to this day still use lead in paints. This lead-based oil paint is the same paint that gives off high amounts of harmful VOCs, contributing to greenhouse gases and global warming climate change. Lead in paint is one of its more damaging applications. As a pigment in paints, especially in white, yellow, and red lead-based paints, lead is in these paints has gone on and continues to pollute the environment and poison millions. As a natural element, lead does not break down in the environment. Once lead has been dispersed and redeposited in the environment, it remains there and can poison generations unless it is controlled or removed. Lead poisoning occurs when lead enters the body via tainted water, by eating tainted soil, eating paint chips containing lead, and breathing or swallowing lead dust. Children tend to obtain lead poisoning from eating paint chips, from putting hands or other objects covered with lead dust in their mouths, and by inhaling lead dust, especially during renovations that disturb painted surfaces where household dust can pick up lead from deteriorating lead-based paint. Among the methods of poisoning, lead dust poses among the greatest threats due to its subtle method of being inhaled, ingested, and unknowingly absorbed. During normal activities, lead dust can be generated when renovations are occurring. It is much more extreme. Lead dust can form when lead-based paint is dry scraped, dry sanded, or heated. Dust also forms when painted surfaces bump or rub against each other and other surfaces such as pinch points and friction-bearing surfaces. Lead dust also appears during natural aging and erosion of surfaces. Lead chips and dust can get on surfaces and objects we interact with daily. Settled lead dust can re-enter the air when we vacuum, sweep, or walk through it. Children with low lead blood levels may not exhibit symptoms and yet are still being exposed to the poisoning. In addition, children who seem healthy can have high levels of lead in their bodies. In the average adult, 10 to 15% of lead that reaches the digestive tract is absorbed. Young children and pregnant women, on the other hand, absorb as much as 50% more lead than the average adult due to the body's inability to distinguish it during periods of stress and the body's growth demands. Lead exposure is very harmful to young children and babies, even before they are born. As a result of children's bodies absorbing more lead, their brains and nervous systems are more susceptible to the damaging effects. If not detected early, children with high blood levels can suffer from blood and brain disorders, damage to the brain and nervous system, behavioral and learning problems such as hyperactivity, slowed growth, hearing problems, headaches, high blood pressure, digestive problems, nerve disorders, memory and concentration problems, muscle and joint pain, nausea, insomnia, lethargy, abdominal pains, irritability, reduced motor skills and development, reduced IQ, in severe cases, coma, and even death. Adults with high blood levels can suffer from all of the above symptoms, plus difficulty during pregnancy and other reproductive problems in both men and women. Exposure to lead has been linked to cancer in children and adults alike. As previously stated, lead has been and is still used in various forms of number of products. Lead acetate, also known as the sugar of lead, was used by the Roman Empire as a sweetening for wine. This is considered by some to have been the cause of the dementia in many of the Roman emperors, contributing to the cause of the fall of the Roman Empire. The sweetness of lead in any form, especially in paint, is a big challenge, since it actually promotes children to put it in their mouths. Japanese geisha are another example to where lead-based makeup is believed to have caused severe illness and death to those who used it. The concern about lead's role in mental retardation in children and its link to schizophrenia in adults was one of the key factors that brought about its overall reduction of use. While the sale of lead-based paint has been discontinued in several industrial countries for some time, many older houses still substantially contain large amounts of lead-based paint. It is generally recommended that old paint should never be stripped by sanding, as this may generate lead dust, which can be inhaled or ingested. The older your home or building, the more likely it contains lead-based paint. Many homes built in the U.S. before 1978 have lead-based paint, and while the U.S. federal government banned the use of lead-based paint in homes in 1978, it can still be found in urban, suburban, and city homes and buildings across the country. Lead-based paint can be identified with lead home test kits, the same ones we will be using on the example property in this course. Consumers should not, however, rely on these tests before doing renovations or to ensure their safety. Studies suggest that they are not always accurate and only questionably test what is on the surface. They don't tell what is below the surface, sometimes several layers down. To test for that, a trained professional should be employed using the more accurate X-ray fluorescence or XRF. They can also do a T-clip test, toxicity, characteristic, leaching procedure. This is done by removing a physical sample and sending it to a laboratory for analysis to determine the content of lead. Testing should never be something that is maybe wanted. It's needed, and without it, suspect surfaces should be dealt with as though they are contaminated and be handled accordingly. Whether apartment buildings or single-family homes, private or public housing, interior or exterior deteriorating, lead-based paint poses a serious health risk to their occupants and children and elderly in particular. Abatement is intended to lessen the health risk associated with lead-based paint and can involve the covering of hazardous materials with approved coatings. It can also include enclosing them with hard barriers or alternatively removing the entire hazard. Removal includes the extraction of lead paint substrate or stripping of just the lead-based paint itself. Full removal, however, should be generally reserved for limited areas. Paint removal techniques demand high levels of control as well as worker protection. Stripping the lead-based paint also generates significant amounts of hazardous waste, which requires special transportation, disposal, and storage maintenance. In the USA, to protect families from lead exposure due to paint, dust, and soil, in 1992, Congress passed the Residential Lead-Based Paint Hazard Reduction Act, also known as Title 10. 4 years later, on March 6, 1996, the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, in collaboration with the Department of Housing and Urban Development, published a final rule, Lead Requirements for Disclosure of Known Lead-Based Paint Hazards in Housing, which requires the disclosure of known information on lead-based paint and lead-based paint hazards before the sale or lease of most housing built before 1978. There is no law that says you have to remove the lead-based paint. The object is to make living conditions dust and fiber-free and safe for all building occupants. This can be accomplished with simple in-place management. I continue to educate all on how even if there is lead-based paint present in your buildings or structures, it can be safely contained and controlled with the right, simply applied protective coatings. This easy method of containment with green coatings encasement, sealing in harmful materials, is used all the time with many types of potentially harmful materials, such as asbestos, lead-based paint, solid PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls, and other hazards, along with waterproofing exterior building surfaces, including roofs. In the next module, I'll be discussing another hazardous substance used in building materials, PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls, and how they can also be safely and logically controlled with green coatings encasement. In closing that segment, I'll be summing up with the well-reasoned, sound conclusion of what is quite often the best way to handle solid hazardous materials.